The invasion begins. The skies over New York City darkened as the massive Zarkon warships descended through the atmosphere. Their sleek obsidian hulls reflected the panicked city below, distorting the image of a world about to change forever. Air raid sirens wailed, their mournful cry a stark counterpoint to the strange, low hum emanating from the alien vessels. General Michael Reeves stood in the Pentagon's command center, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays. He watched in growing dismay as red dots representing Earth's defensive forces winked out one by one. "Status report," he barked, his voice tight with tension. A young lieutenant swiveled in her chair, her face pale. "Sir, our missiles aren't even scratching their shields. The Air Force is reporting heavy losses and ground forces are. They're being decimated." Reeves closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself a brief instant of despair before snapping back to attention. "What about the EMP strikes?" "Ineffective, sir. Their systems seem to be hardened against electromagnetic pulses." The general's jaw clenched. Humanity had thrown everything they had at the invaders. Nuclear warheads, electromagnetic pulses, even experimental plasma weapons, and nothing had made so much as a dent in the Zarkon defenses. Outside the command center, the world was descending into chaos. News feeds showed scenes of destruction from every corner of the globe. The Eiffel Tower, its iron frame twisted and melted, collapsed into the Seine. The Great Wall of China, which had stood for millennia, was reduced to rubble under the aliens' energy weapons. In Rio de Janeiro, Christ the Redeemer's outstretched arms crumbled, as if in final, futile supplication. Humanity's military might, once thought invincible, proved laughably inadequate against the technological superiority of the Zarkon. Fighter jets were swatted from the sky like flies, their missiles harmlessly dissipating against shimmering energy shields. Tanks, the iron behemoths that had dominated terrestrial warfare for a century, were reduced to smoldering husks by pinpoint energy beams. In Central Park, a group of Zarkon warriors strode confidently through the abandoned pathways. Their armor, a seamless blend of organic and technological components, pulsed with an eerie blue light. One of them picked up a discarded assault rifle, turning it over in its three-fingered hand with what could only be described as disdain. The alien's voice, when it spoke, was a dissonant blend of clicks and whirs, translated by its suit's systems into English. "Projectile weapons," it said, the scorn evident even through the electronic filter. How quaint. Did they truly believe these primitive tools could harm us? Its companion, taller and adorned with more elaborate armor patterns, let out a sound that might have been laughter. "This species is even more backward than our scouts reported. Assimilating this world will be simpler than we anticipated." As the Zarkon continued their casual stroll through the park, a figure watched them from the shadows of a nearby building. Captain Lisa Ortiz of the U.S. Army Rangers gripped her rifle tightly, every instinct screaming at her to open fire. But she had seen what happened to those who tried to engage the aliens directly. Instead, she keyed her radio, her voice a harsh whisper. "Command, this is Ranger 1. I have eyes on hostiles in Central Park. Requesting instructions." The response came back almost immediately, General Reeves' voice tight with strain. "Ranger 1, maintain your position and observe. Do not, I repeat, do not engage. We need intel on their capabilities and weaknesses." Ortiz acknowledged the order, though every fiber of her being rebelled against the idea of inaction. She watched as the aliens examined more abandoned human weapons, their body language radiating an arrogance that made her blood boil. Back at the Pentagon, General Reeves pored over reports from the few remaining active military units around the world. The pattern was the same everywhere. Conventional weapons were useless, and the Zarkon seemed to be toying with Earth's defenders rather than launching a full-scale assault. "They're studying us," Reeves muttered, a cold realization settling in his gut, like scientists observing lab rats in a maze. As if to confirm his suspicions, new reports began flooding in. The Zarkon were setting up strange devices in major cities around the world. massive crystalline structures that pulsed with the same eerie blue energy as their ships and armor. Analysis, Reeves demanded, pointing at one of the structures on the main screen. A scientist in a rumpled lab coat stepped forward, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Based on the energy readings we're getting, sir, we believe these are some kind of terraforming devices. They're altering the atmosphere, making it more like their home world. The implications were clear. The Zarkon weren't just invading. They were planning to remake Earth in their own image, with no regard for its native inhabitants. As the first day of the invasion drew to a close, pockets of resistance continued to fight, more out of desperation than any real hope of victory. In London, the Royal Marines made a valiant last stand at Buckingham Palace, their bullets pinging harmlessly off alien shields. In Moscow, T-90 tanks fired volley after volley at a Zarkon dropship, only to be vaporized by a casual sweep of its energy weapons. Night fell, but there was no respite from the terror. The Zarkon ships illuminated the skies with searchlights, hunting down any humans foolish enough to venture out into the open. In refugee camps hastily erected on the outskirts of burning cities, shell-shocked survivors huddled together, trying to comprehend how their world had changed so drastically in just 24 hours. General Reeves stood at the window of the command center, watching as distant flashes of light indicated ongoing battles, or perhaps just the Zarkon amusing themselves by destroying more of humanity's infrastructure. He felt the weight of command pressing down on him like never before. How could he protect his people against an enemy so far beyond their technological capabilities? As dawn broke on the second day of the invasion, bringing with it no relief from the nightmare, Reeves made a decision. Conventional warfare had failed. It was time to think outside the box. Get me all our top scientists, weapons developers, and special forces commanders, he ordered. If we can't beat them with brute force, we'll have to outsmart them. Little did the general know, the key to humanity's survival was not in some high-tech laboratory or top-secret military base. It was in the hands of a small team of soldiers who were about to discover that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. As the Zarkon continued their seemingly unstoppable advance, a spark of hope was about to be ignited, one that would remind the aliens that they had made a grave mistake in underestimating the ingenuity and determination of the human spirit. The last line of defense. In the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, far from the chaos of the cities, Sergeant Sarah Chen lay motionless in the undergrowth. Her camouflage blended seamlessly with the moss and ferns, making her virtually invisible to the naked eye. Through the scope of her high-powered rifle, she watched a group of Zarkon soldiers examining the remains of a military outpost. Sarah was part of an elite sniper unit, one of the few special forces teams that had managed to avoid detection since the invasion began. Her team had been on a training exercise deep in the wilderness when the first attacks came, and their isolation had become their salvation. "I count 5 tangos," she whispered into her comm unit. 4 grunts, 1 officer type. Same shield config as the others we've seen. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Martins, lay a few feet away, his binoculars trained on the same scene. Roger that. Any sign they've spotted the cache. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she watched the alien officer approach a carefully concealed entrance to an underground bunker. Negative, but they're getting close. Stand by. For days, Sarah and her team had been observing the Zarkon, looking for any weakness in their seemingly impenetrable defenses. They had watched helplessly as the aliens decimated conventional military forces, their energy shields rendering human weapons useless. But Sarah refused to believe there wasn't a way to fight back. As she watched, the Zarkon officer activated some kind of scanning device, sweeping it across the forest floor. Sarah's heart rate spiked as the alien paused, its attention focused on the hidden bunker entrance. "They found it," she hissed. "We can't let them access those weapons." Jake's voice came back, tense but controlled. "What's the play, Sarge? We know bullets don't work against their shields." Sarah's mind raced. They had one advantage. The Zarkon didn't know they were there. If they could just find a way past those shields. Suddenly, her eye caught something through the scope. As one of the alien grunts moved, there was a momentary flicker in its shield. Barely noticeable, but definitely there. "Jake, did you see that?" she whispered urgently. "Negative. What am I looking for?" "The shields. They're not constant. There's a fluctuation when they move quickly." Sarah's mind whirled with the implications. If the shields had to adjust to rapid movement, there might be a split-second window of vulnerability. It wasn't much, but it was the first glimmer of hope they'd had since the invasion began. "We need to test this," she said, her voice filled with newfound determination. "Get the others ready. We're going to have to time this perfectly." Over the next hour, Sarah coordinated with the rest of her team, positioned at various points around the clearing. They watched, they waited, and they planned. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Sarah made her decision. "On my mark," she breathed into the calm. 3, 2, 1, execute. In perfect synchronization, Sarah and her team opened fire. But instead of aiming directly at the Zarkon, they targeted the trees around them. Heavy branches crashed down, forcing the aliens to move quickly to avoid being crushed. And in that moment of rapid movement, Sarah saw it again, the flicker in the shields. Without hesitation, she squeezed the trigger. The crack of her rifle echoed through the forest, followed immediately by the sound of her bullet finding its mark. The Zarkon officer stumbled, purple blood seeping from a wound in its chest. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The remaining aliens stared at their fallen leader in shock, clearly unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then chaos erupted. Sarah's team pressed their advantage, timing their shots with uncanny precision. One by one, the Zarkon fell, their once invincible shields proving useless against the perfectly timed strikes. In less than a minute, it was over. 5 Zarkon warriors lay dead, and Sarah's team emerged from their hiding spots, approaching the scene with a mixture of caution and disbelief. Jake let out a low whistle as he knelt beside one of the alien corpses. "I'll be damned, Sarge. You did it. You found a way to beat them." Sarah nodded, her expression grim but determined. "We found a way. But this is just the beginning. We need to get this information to command, and fast. The tide of this war just turned." As her team secured the area and began examining the alien technology, Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. They had proven that the Zarkon weren't invincible. Humanity had a fighting chance. Little did she know, her discovery was about to change the course of the war and make her the most feared human in the galaxy. Part 3. Turning the Tide. News of Sergeant Sarah Chen's success spread like wildfire through what remained of Earth's military command structure. Within days, her team was extracted from the Pacific Northwest and brought to a secret underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. General Reeves, his face haggard from sleepless nights, but his eyes alight with newfound hope, greeted Sarah personally. "Sergeant Chen," he said, grasping her hand firmly, "you and your team may have just saved humanity." Sarah, uncomfortable with the attention but acutely aware of the responsibility now resting on her shoulders, nodded curtly. "Thank you, sir, but we have a lot of work to do if we're going to replicate our success on a larger scale." Over the next week, Sarah worked tirelessly with a team of scientists and engineers, explaining in detail what she had observed about the Zarkon shields. The fluctuations were minute, lasting only milliseconds, but they were consistent. Dr. Amelia Rodriguez, a brilliant physicist who had been working on energy weapon prototypes before the invasion, was particularly excited by Sarah's findings. "If we can predict these fluctuations," she explained, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke, "we might be able to create a targeting system that automatically times shots to exploit the weakness." While the scientists worked on the technical aspects, Sarah focused on training other special forces units in the techniques her team had developed. The work was grueling, requiring split-second timing and incredible marksmanship, but the soldiers threw themselves into it with desperate enthusiasm. As the days turned into weeks, reports began to filter in from around the world. Small resistance cells, armed with the knowledge Sarah had discovered, were beginning to score victories against the Zarkon. It wasn't enough to turn the tide of the war. Not yet, but it was a start. The aliens, for their part, seemed bewildered by this sudden change in fortune. Their casualties, once virtually non-existent, were beginning to mount. In response, they became more cautious, less likely to expose themselves to potential sniper fire. Sarah knew they needed a bigger win, something to truly shake the Zarkon's confidence and inspire hope in the millions of humans still living under alien occupation. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-ranking Zarkon commander was planning to inspect the terraforming device in what used to be Central Park. It was a risky target, the heart of occupied New York City, crawling with alien patrols, but the potential payoff was too great to ignore. General Reeves called Sarah to his office to discuss the mission. "I won't order you to do this, Sergeant," he said, his voice grave. "It's a volunteer operation only. The risks air." "I'll do it," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "My team and I started this. We'll see it through." The general nodded, a mixture of pride and concern in his eyes. "Very well. You leave at dawn." The insertion into New York was harrowing. Sarah and her team, now expanded to include some of the best snipers from around the world, had to navigate through sewers and abandoned subway tunnels to avoid detection. The once bustling city was now an alien landscape, the familiar skyscrapers overshadowed by bizarre Zarkon structures that pulsed with otherworldly energy. They set up their positions in the ruins of buildings surrounding Central Park, each sniper carefully hidden, and with multiple escape routes planned. Sarah, taking the most exposed position with the best line of sight to the terraforming device, felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine despite the cool air. Hours passed. The tension was palpable as they waited, watching Zarkon patrols move through the park with arrogant confidence. Then, finally, their target arrived. The Zarkon commander was immediately distinguishable from its subordinates. Its armor was more elaborate, covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the sunlight. It moved with an air of supreme authority, barely acknowledging the lesser aliens around it. Sarah took a deep breath, centering herself as she had done countless times before. Through her scope, she watched the commander approach the terraforming device. She keyed her radio twice, the signal to her team to stand ready. The commander reached out to touch the device, and in that moment of movement, Sarah saw what she was waiting for. The telltale flicker of its shield adjusting. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. The crack of Sarah's rifle echoed across the eerily quiet park. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed as though time itself had frozen. Then, with agonizing slowness, the Zarkon commander crumpled to the ground, purple blood seeping from a precise wound in its head. Chaos erupted instantly. The surrounding Zarkon guards frantically scanned for the source of the attack, their weapons charging with crackling energy. But Sarah's team was already in motion, executing their carefully choreographed plan with lethal precision. Sniper fire rained down from multiple directions, each shot timed perfectly to exploit the momentary weaknesses in the Zarkon shields. Alien after alien fell, their once impenetrable defenses now fatally flawed. Sarah didn't allow herself to celebrate. She was already moving, scrambling down the ruined stairwell of her vantage point. "Fall back to extraction points," she ordered into her comm. "Mission accomplished. Do not engage further." As she emerged onto the debris-strewn street, Sarah caught a glimpse of the park. The terraforming device was sputtering, its eerie glow diminishing. Whether by design or chance, her shot had not only taken out the commander, but had also damaged the alien technology. The exfiltration was as tense as the insertion had been. Sarah could hear the enraged howls of Zarkon search parties, growing ever closer as she navigated the labyrinthine ruins of New York. But the countless hours of preparation paid off. One by one, her team reported in, safely reaching their extraction points. As the stealth transport lifted off, Cloaked from Zarkon sensors, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe. She looked around at her team, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "We did it," Jake said, his voice filled with awe. "We actually bloody did it." Sarah nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "We showed them we're not as primitive as they thought. But this is just the beginning." The news of the successful mission spread rapidly through the human resistance. Grainy footage, captured by hidden cameras, showed the fall of the Zarkon commander and the subsequent chaos. The video went viral, spreading hope like wildfire through the oppressed population. Back at the Rocky Mountain base, General Reeves was waiting to greet them, his face beaming with pride. "Outstanding work, Sergeant Chen," he said, shaking her hand vigorously. "You've given us more than just a tactical victory. You've given us hope." Sarah, uncomfortable with the praise, simply nodded. "What's our next move, sir?" Reeves' expression turned serious. "We've received some interesting intel. It seems your success has the Zarkon leadership rattled. They're calling for a full-scale assault to crush the human resistance once and for all." A hush fell over the room. The implications were clear. The Zarkon were done toying with humanity. They were about to unleash their full might. "Then we need to be ready," Sarah said, her voice steady. "We need to share our tactics with every resistance cell, every military unit still fighting. It's time to take this global." Reeves nodded in agreement. "Already on it. But there's something else." He paused, his eyes meeting Sarah's. "We've identified their command ship. It's in high orbit, coordinating the entire invasion. If we could take it out," Sarah finished the thought for him, "we could throw their entire operation into disarray." "Exactly. But getting to it." Reeves trailed off, the impossible nature of the task hanging in the air between them. Sarah straightened, her eyes blazing with determination. "We'll find a way, sir. We have to." As she left the briefing room, Sarah's mind was already racing, formulating plans and strategies. The Zarkon had made a critical mistake. They had assumed their technological superiority made them invincible, but humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to adapt, to find creative solutions to impossible problems. The next phase of the war was about to begin, and Sarah Chen was determined to prove that humanity would not go quietly into the night. The Zarkon had awakened a sleeping giant, and they were about to learn the true cost of underestimating the human spirit. Counterattack. In the weeks following the New York operation, Earth witnessed a transformation. The success of Sarah Chen's team had rekindled a fire in the hearts of the oppressed population. Resistance cells, once scattered and demoralized, now coordinated their efforts with renewed vigor. Sarah found herself at the center of a global training initiative. Through secure channels, she shared the techniques her team had developed, teaching others how to exploit the weaknesses in Zarkon shielding. It was grueling work, with Sarah often going days without sleep, but the results were undeniable. Reports flooded in from around the world. In the ruins of London, a small team of SAS operatives took down a Zarkon patrol without a single human casualty. In the mountains of Afghanistan, local fighters ambushed an alien mining operation, securing crucial resources for the resistance. Even in the heart of Occupy Tokyo, a lone sniper managed to assassinate a high-ranking Zarkon official. The aliens, for the first time since their arrival, found themselves on the defensive. Their once casual patrols now moved in tight formations, wary of human snipers that could strike from any shadow. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded them was shattered. But Sarah knew that these victories, while important, were just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, taking the fight to the Zarkon command ship in orbit. "It's a suicide mission," Jake argued during one of their strategy sessions. "Even if we could get up there, their internal defenses would cut us to ribbons before we could do any real damage." Sarah leaned over the holographic display of the Zarkon vessel, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We're not thinking creatively enough," she murmured. "We're still approaching this like a conventional military operation." Dr. Rodriguez, who had been working tirelessly on adapting human technology to counter the Zarkon, spoke up. "What if we don't need to get inside at all?" All eyes turned to her as she continued, excitement building in her voice. "We've been analyzing the debris from downed Zarkon ships. Their hull is incredibly dense, designed to withstand the stresses of faster-than-light travel. But it's also what allows their shields to form such a seamless energy barrier." Sarah's eyes widened as she began to see where the scientist was going. "You're saying their greatest strength could be their weakness?" Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. If we could find a way to overload their shield generators from the outside, the feedback could tear the ship apart from the inside out." The room erupted in excited chatter as the implications sank in. For the first time, they had the glimmer of a plan that might actually work. Over the next few days, Sarah worked closely with Rodriguez and her team, helping to design a weapon that could deliver the necessary energy burst to overload the Zarkon shields. The result was a massive, almost crude-looking device that bore little resemblance to the sleek alien technology they were used to seeing. "It's not pretty," Rodriguez admitted as they looked at the finished product, "but it should do the job. The challenge now is getting it close enough to the command ship to be effective." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing ahead to the next phase of the plan. "Leave that to me," she said, a determined glint in her eye. The plan that emerged was audacious, bordering on insane. Using salvaged Zarkon technology and good old-fashioned human ingenuity, they would piggyback their weapon onto a supply ship headed for the command vessel. Sarah and a small team would stow away, guiding the weapon to its target. As the day of the mission approached, tension in the base reached a fever pitch. Everyone knew that this could be the turning point of the war. Success would throw the entire Zarkon operation into chaos, while failure would likely mean the end of organized human resistance. The night before the launch, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. She wandered the quiet corridors of the base, eventually finding herself in the hangar where their jury-rigged weapon waited. As she stood there, lost in thought, she sensed a presence behind her. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" Jake's voice was soft in the cavernous space. Sarah shook her head, not turning around. "Keep thinking about everything that could go wrong." Jake moved to stand beside her, both of them staring at the weapon that held the fate of humanity in its ungainly frame. "You know, when this all started, I thought we were done for," he said after a long moment. "But you never lost hope. You just kept pushing, kept fighting." Sarah finally turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. Jake wasn't usually one for heartfelt speeches. He met her gaze, his expression serious. "What I'm trying to say is, if anyone can pull this off, it's you, Sarah. You've gotten us this far. You'll get us through this too." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She reached out and squeezed Jake's shoulder, words failing her. In that moment, the weight of what they were about to attempt settled fully on her shoulders. But instead of fear, she felt a surge of determination. As dawn broke, Sarah Chen and her team made their final preparations. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and the next few hours would determine whether humanity would live to see another sunrise. The final stand. The stolen Zarkon supply ship shuddered as it broke through Earth's atmosphere, its hull glowing red-hot from the friction. Inside, Sarah Chen and her small team of elite operatives checked their gear one last time, each lost in their own thoughts. Their plan was simple in concept, nightmarishly complex in execution. They would ride the supply ship to the Zarkon command vessel, using its legitimate clearance codes to bypass the initial security checks. Once docked, they would deploy their secret weapon, the shield overload device that Dr. Rodriguez and her team had cobbled together from salvaged alien tech and human ingenuity. Sarah looked around at her team, a mix of seasoned veterans and bright-eyed rookies who had distinguished themselves in the resistance. Jake caught her eye and gave a small nod. No words were necessary. They both knew the stakes. As they approached the massive Zarkon command ship, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Seeing it up close, the true scale of what they were up against became apparent. The alien vessel dwarfed anything humanity had ever constructed, its sleek lines bristling with weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. "Incoming transmission," the pilot announced, his voice tight with tension. "They're requesting authentication." Sarah moved to the communication console, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. This was the moment of truth. If their stolen codes didn't work, the mission would be over before it began. She input the sequence they had intercepted, holding her breath as the seconds ticked by. Finally, a response came through. A series of alien glyphs that their translation software quickly deciphered. "We're cleared for docking," Sarah announced, unable to keep a note of surprise from her voice. A collective sigh of relief went through the small cabin. As they maneuvered into the cavernous docking bay, Sarah addressed her team one last time. "Remember, we move fast, and we hit hard. The Zarkon won't expect an attack here, in the heart of their command structure. We use that surprise to our advantage." The ship settled into its berth with a metallic clang. For a moment, all was still. Then, with practiced precision, Sarah's team burst into action. They poured out of the ship, their weapons at the ready. The few Zarkon dock workers present were taken completely by surprise, falling before they could even raise the alarm. Sarah felt a grim satisfaction. Their intelligence had been correct about the reduced security in this section. "Move, move," Sarah barked, urging her team towards the access corridor that would lead them to their target, the ship's main shield generator. They encountered sporadic resistance as they pushed deeper into the ship, but their surprise attack and superior tactics allowed them to overcome each obstacle. Sarah's mind raced, keeping track of their progress against the mental map she had memorized. Finally, they reached the massive doors that sealed off the shield generator room. Jake stepped forward, planting explosive charges while the rest of the team took up defensive positions. "Fire in the hole," Jake called out, and the charges detonated with a thunderous roar. As the smoke cleared, Sarah led the charge into the generator room. What they found inside made them skid to a halt. The room was vast, easily the size of a football field, filled with pulsing alien machinery that hummed with barely contained power. And at the center of it all stood a figure that could only be the Zarkon Supreme Commander. The alien was tall, easily 7 feet, its armor more elaborate and fearsome than any they had encountered before. It regarded the human intruders with an expression that, even on its alien features, could only be described as amused disdain. So, it spoke, its voice a grating metallic sound that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "The primitives have finally mustered the courage to face us directly." Sarah raised her rifle, keenly aware that every second they delayed gave the Zarkon more time to mount a response. "It's over," she declared, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "We've beaten your defenses. We've learned to counter your technology. Surrender now, and we can end this without further bloodshed." The Zarkon commander's laughter was like nails on a chalkboard. "Foolish human, you have no idea of the forces you're dealing with. Your species is but an infant crawling in the dirt. We have traversed the stars for millennia. Your paltry victories mean nothing in the grand scheme of our conquest." As it spoke, the air around the commander began to shimmer, a personal shield springing to life. Sarah's team opened fire instinctively, but their shots dissipated harmlessly against the barrier. "Now," the commander growled, all traces of amusement gone from its voice, "allow me to show you the true power of the Zarkon Empire." With a gesture, the alien machinery in the room surged to life. Arcs of energy crackled between the towering structures, the hum rising to a deafening roar. Sarah realized with horror that the commander was channeling the full power of the ship's shields through its personal barrier. They had walked right into a trap. But in that moment of despair, Sarah's tactical mind kicked into overdrive. The commander's arrogance had presented them with an opportunity, if they could overload its personal shield. "Jake," she shouted over the din. "The device. Now." Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes. He sprinted towards their secret weapon, still secured to his back. The Zarkon commander, focused on its display of power, didn't realize the danger until it was too late. Jake slammed the device against the alien's shield, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing apart, the overload began. The commander's shield fluctuated wildly, unable to contain the massive energy surge. Sarah watched in awe as fractures appeared in the alien's armor, lines of brilliant light shining through. "Fall back," she screamed, grabbing Jake and hauling him towards the exit. Her team didn't need to be told twice, scrambling for safety as the chain reaction built to its inevitable conclusion. They had barely made it out of the generator room when the explosion hit. The force of it threw them off their feet, the entire ship groaning around them as the overload cascaded through its systems. Alarms blared, and Sarah could hear the panic in the alien voices echoing through the corridors. "To the ship," she ordered, her voice hoarse from the smoke and exertion. Their mad dash back to the docking bay was a blur of chaos. Zarkon soldiers, their usual coordination shattered, offered only token resistance. As they piled into their stolen vessel, Sarah caught a glimpse of the destruction they had wrought. Entire sections of the command ship were going dark, its once impenetrable shields failing catastrophically. As their small ship disengaged from the dying Leviathan, Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck a blow that the Zarkon might never recover from. The journey back to Earth was tense, all eyes watching for signs of pursuit, but none came. The Zarkon fleet, without its command structure, fell into disarray. As they re-entered the atmosphere, cheers erupted from the cockpit. Ground control was reporting Zarkon ships falling from the sky all over the globe, their systems failing as the cascade of overloads spread through their network. Sarah leaned back in her seat, exhaustion finally catching up with her. They had won a great victory today, but she knew the war was far from over. The Zarkon might be reeling, but they were still a formidable enemy. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of hope, Sarah Chen allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had proven its worth among the stars. As Sarah Chen and her team touched down at the secret Rocky Mountain base, they were met with a hero's welcome. Cheers erupted from the gathered crowd of soldiers, scientists, and support staff. General Reeves was at the forefront, his face beaming with pride and relief. "Sergeant Chen," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he saluted her. "You and your team have done the impossible. The Zarkon fleet is in disarray, and we're receiving reports of their ground forces retreating worldwide." Sarah returned the salute, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of their monumental achievement. "Thank you, sir, but this is just the beginning. We've won a battle, not the war." Reeves nodded solemnly. "You're right, of course, but you've given us something we haven't had in a long time, a fighting chance." As the debriefings began and the full scope of their victory became clear, Sarah found herself thrust into the spotlight. The story of the human sniper who had outmaneuvered the technologically superior Zarkon spread like wildfire, becoming a rallying cry for resistance movements around the globe. In the days that followed, humanity began to push back in earnest. With the Zarkon command structure in chaos, their once coordinated assault fell apart. Resistance cells, armed with the knowledge of how to exploit the aliens' weaknesses, struck decisive blows against the invaders. But Sarah knew better than to become complacent. She threw herself into training more special ops teams, working tirelessly to ensure that humanity would never again be caught unprepared. Months passed, and slowly but surely, Earth began to reclaim itself. The alien terraforming devices were dismantled, their eerie blue glow fading from city skylines. As Zarkon strongholds fell, humanity salvaged what they could of the advanced technology, determined to learn from it and grow stronger. On the anniversary of the invasion, Sarah stood atop a hill overlooking the rebuilt skyline of New York City. The scars of war were still visible, but so too were the signs of recovery and progress. Sleek new buildings incorporated salvaged Zarkon technology, a testament to humanity's adaptability. Jake joined her, looking out over the city. "Hard to believe it's been a year," he said quietly. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "We've come a long way." "Thanks to you," Jake added. "You know they're calling you the Alien Slayer now. There are kids dressing up as you for Halloween." Sarah groaned, shaking her head. "Great. Just what I always wanted, to be an action figure." Jake chuckled, but his expression quickly turned serious. "You know it's not over, right? The Zarkon will be back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for years, but they'll come." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But next time, we'll be ready." As if on cue, her comm unit beeped. It was General Reeves. "Chen, we've got a situation. Long-range sensors have picked up an unidentified object entering the solar system. We need you at command ASAP." Sarah exchanged a look with Jake, both of them already moving towards the waiting transport. "On our way, sir," she responded. As they lifted off, Sarah's mind was already racing, formulating strategies and contingencies. The Zarkon invasion had taught humanity a harsh lesson, but it had also revealed their greatest strength, the ability to adapt, to overcome, to never give up in the face of impossible odds. Whatever this new threat might be, Sarah Chen and the people of Earth would face it head-on. They had earned their place among the stars, and they would defend it with everything they had. The Zarkon had made a critical error in underestimating humanity. As Sarah prepared to face whatever challenge lay ahead, she allowed herself a grim smile. They wouldn't be the last to make that mistake. The future was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. But one thing was clear: humanity's story among the stars was just beginning.